Hello, how was your week? That's a question I ask the little kids very often at the start of the children's story when I talk on a Sabbath morning. And I get all kinds of answers. Sometimes it's their birthday or they've been to a birthday party. Maybe one of them has just lost a tooth. All kinds of answers they can throw back at me. And it's always interesting to see who it is that's going to speak up and what they're going to say. But I'm going to ask you the same question. How was your week? My week has been a different kind of week. I had a bit of a clue at the end of last week, trying to learn a different way of doing and dealing with ministry. You see, there's a number of my colleagues that have been put on furlough, and there's a small team of us that are now trying to cover a bigger number of churches and working with the elders and the church leaders to see how we can best facilitate their needs over the next couple of months. So how was your week? Going on furlough is not something unique to us in the church and my fellow colleagues. I was driving along about a week ago and my side window suddenly smashed, my driver's side, bang! And I don't know what happened, what made it break, but it broke. And of course I had to get it fixed. And I contacted the glass company and they were willing to say that because I'm a clergyman that I would be a frontline worker. I don't work in a hospital. But they said, yes, you're important enough and it's a bit of an emergency if the whole glass is broken. It's non-existent. So they came out to fix it. And talking with the glass fitter, he actually told me that, because he knew on his worksheet who I was and the reason for being there and my job. And he said, you're a clergyman. I said, yes. He said, I have 7 members of my family who are in the clergy. And we had a good long chat about that, and then that got us talking about his own work and so on. And he said they're really struggling for work. In fact, a lot of his colleagues have been laid off, not laid off, but put on furlough on this government job retention scheme, just because the work isn't there. And he's just hoping that he'll be able to keep his job, and maybe he will be put on furlough as well. So people learning different things and experiencing different things because of the current conditions with this pandemic. So how was your week? Have you been put on furlough? Maybe you've been laid off. Maybe you're working for the NHS and you are working flat out at the moment, caring for these people with this virus. I just heard today of someone who has just worked 3 shifts in hospital back to back just because of the workload. So how was your week? Some people are finding it very difficult. Some people are finding it questionable as to whether they're going to have a job to go back to. For those people who have lost a job, you're one of some. I saw about a week ago the Office of National Statistics put out a survey, and they said, from memory, roughly speaking, they were saying about a quarter, 25% of companies said that they had actually had to lay people off. About 50% of people said that they were still working as normal, same workforce. But 25% of companies said that they'd actually increased the number of staff that they had. Depends, I guess, on what kind of industry that you're working in. I read just a couple of days ago that one of the big supermarkets has taken on 45,000 people to help with all the extra deliveries. And my wife Emma said to me that a couple of weeks ago she'd read that a big online shop has taken on, or was looking to take on, 100,000 people to help with extra deliveries. And I read a couple of weeks ago in Farmers Weekly how farmers are worried about the lack of immigrant workers to come and work in their field, both planting and for picking, harvesting the soft fruits and the other vegetables that are ready to be harvested within a few weeks. And they're saying 70,000 people that they're going to need to help do this job. So how was your week? This period of time, we are thinking of Easter. This is the Easter weekend. And almost 2,000 years ago, there was a significant, well, it wasn't called Easter weekend, it was a significant Passover, that some significant events took place. So if we were to ask, let's say, Peter, how was your week? And I'm recording this on a Friday evening, and you'll be watching maybe on a Saturday or some other time, it doesn't matter. But if we asked Peter on that Friday evening or on the Saturday morning, Sabbath morning, Peter, good to see you. How was your week? Well, we might see a red-eyed, teary-faced Peter looking at us and saying, it started off really well. I was with Jesus and we had this triumphal entry into Jerusalem. I thought that Jesus was going to become king. If you want to know more of that story, then you'll need to click below and find a previous talk that I shared about this triumphal entry. Making or Faking, I think, was the talk name. Peter would tell us how that his week started off fantastically. And then he would tell us of other things that happened during the week and this preparation for this Thursday evening, for the Passover meal, and how he was so excited that, is this the time when Jesus is going to establish his kingdom? And how am I going to feature in it? And then Peter would tell us on how he was eating the meal, and Jesus was saying some kind of strange stuff to Judas. And then Judas left. Don't know what's going on there, but just Judas left. And then Peter would tell us how during that meal, Jesus was telling them, this is what is about to happen. And how Peter, full of bravado, said, Jesus, I would even die for you. Wherever you go, whatever happens, I don't mind. I'll die for you. And Jesus looks at Peter. And as Peter would retell the story, Peter would say, I didn't believe what Jesus told me. Jesus told me that even that night that I would betray Jesus 3 times before the cock crows twice. Peter would tell of how they sung a song and then they went and across the Kidron Valley from Jerusalem and up towards the Mount of Olives, and even on that short few 100-meter journey, how Jesus turned to his disciples, to his followers, and how he reminded them, look, all of you are going to desert me tonight. What? Peter would tell you how in the garden they all fell asleep while Jesus was praying, and how Jesus came and woke them up. Said, look, can't you even stay awake? This is an important time. And then Peter would say how Judas turned up with this great crowd of people. They looked like, well, they were soldiers and guards and a whole other bunch of people, and how Judas came and looked at Jesus and held him and said, Rabbi, teacher, and gave Jesus a kiss, which was the cue for the guards to step forward and arrest Jesus. And even in that moment, with all the things going on, and Jesus asking the question, why didn't you come for me when I was in a public place and you come for me in a private place? And how they were afraid, and how Jesus' followers did run away. They deserted Jesus, just like Jesus said a few hours before. And Peter would tell us how somehow he followed. He ran away, but he must have not have gone too far away, because he followed this group, and wherever they took Jesus, and they took Jesus to Caiaphas' house, where there was some discussion and some debate. They were trying to catch Jesus out. Peter would tell us how he would warm himself kind of near the fire, stood in the courtyard, the light from the flickering fire giving a bit of a shadowy view of the people standing around. Peter would tell us how while he was stood there keeping himself warm, listening to this debate about how they could catch Jesus out, one of the servant girls, looking at Peter in that firelight, said, you were one of them. You were with Jesus. And how Peter said, no, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. Definitely not. I wasn't anything to do with Jesus. And then as Peter moves to the gateway, the cock crows once. And then stood in the gateway, still kind of listening, I guess, to what was going on and the conversations. This same servant girl comes by and she says, I am absolutely certain that you must have been with her. I'm sure I saw you with Jesus. And he said, no, it wasn't me. It was not me. Peter denied Jesus twice. Shortly afterwards, a whole bunch of other bystanders, they must have caught this idea from this servant girl, and maybe they've heard Peter talking, and then they said to him, you must be one of his followers, because you're from Galilee as well, aren't you? So you must be with him. And Peter vehemently says, absolutely, I do not know this man. And just at that point, the cock crows again, for the second time. Peter remembers. That's what Jesus said would happen. Before the night was out, that I would betray him 3 times, before the cock crows twice. How was your week? Was it anything like Peter's? Peter would then tell us how Jesus was taken away. They asked him some questions, and Jesus said, yes, I am the Messiah. Blasphemy, blasphemy! We don't need any more evidence. And they beat him, and they spat on him. They blindfolded him, and they mocked him. They said, hey, come on, prophesy, prophesy. And Jesus kept silent. Peter would tell us how Jesus was taken off from Caiaphas' house, taken off to Pilate. Pilate, after some toing and froing, eventually said, yes, go on, take him away, crucify him. By 9 o'clock that morning, Jesus was hanging on a cross. Didn't take very long. Well, Jesus on that cross cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? If you want to hear another talk, again, click just below and you'll hear me talk about those words that Jesus said. My God, why have you forsaken me? And then Jesus gave his last breath. Died. How was your week? Was it anything like Peter's? What happened next, Peter? Well, he'd tell us that they got permission from Pilate, who was surprised that Jesus had died so quickly. In fact, he called the centurion just to double check. Well, is he actually dead? This was the centurion who, at the point of Jesus' death, Jesus breathed his last. When the curtain of the temple, it says, tore in two. This was the centurion that said, surely this is the Son of God. They took Jesus' body with Pilate's permission, wrapped it, and as it was getting later on a Friday, coming up to Sabbath, they wrapped his body and put his body in the tomb. So on that Friday night or Saturday morning, if you ask Peter, how was your week? That's the kind of story you'd hear. How was your week? When it comes to sharing faith, do you think you would have the boldness that Peter claimed he had? Or do you think you'd have the action that Peter actually had? How was your week? Just turn your attention, as we're heading towards a close, but in Romans chapter 10, I'm reading from the New Living Translation. And from verse 9 it says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Isn't that good news? You will be saved. There is a plan. God has a plan for you. He loves you that much. But do you get the 2 points? If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. Confession with your mouth and belief in your heart. You can't have one without the other, not unless you don't want to be saved. In order to be saved, you need to confess with your mouth and believe in your heart. You see, it goes on in Romans 10, verse 10, for it is by believing in your heart that you are made right with God, and it is by confessing with your mouth that you are saved. A few verses on, from verse 14, it says, but how can they call, so this is just referencing before from verse 13 actually, it says, for everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, and that's a direct quote from Joel. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Well, how can I call on the name of the Lord if I don't know about him? So that's what these verses go on to say. Verse 14, but how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they have never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how can anyone go and tell them without being sent? That is why the scriptures say, how beautiful are the feet of messengers who bring good news. You see that kind of sequence. How can this if this? How can this if this? How can... The whole point is people believe because they hear. They hear this good news about Jesus. And then when they hear, They don't keep it to themselves. What does verse 9 say? If we come back to it, if we confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Confession and belief, they go hand in hand. You don't have one without the other. In fact, one helps the other. I put it to you that if you are struggling with your belief, try chattering the gospel. Try telling other people, because there is some kind of divine equation that happens that when, as you start sharing the gospel, as you start talking, the times when I've shared the most are the times when I've grown the most. Verse 16. But not everyone welcomes the good news, for Isaiah the prophet said, Lord, who has believed our message? Isaiah recognized it. Paul, to his letter to the believers in Rome, recognized it. And God recognizes not everyone's going to hear and listen and believe and accept it. But that isn't a reason why you shouldn't tell them. And then verse 17. So, faith comes from hearing. That is, hearing the good news about Jesus. Faith comes from hearing. There is a Chinese proverb that says, the plan of the day is made in the morning. The plan of the day is made in the morning. Now, how you set yourself up for that's how you're going to be able to achieve. So I want to suggest to you that maybe your plan of your day every morning could or should be something along the lines of, God, thank you for the rest that I had last night. I could have done with a bit more, but I'll try and go to bed earlier tonight. Who is it that you want me to speak to today? How was your week? If I were to ask you that question in a week's time, hi, good to see you. How was your week? Would you look at me and look down to the ground and say, well, actually, I had a bit of a Peter week. I really, really crashed out on my faith. And I wasn't willing to speak up for Jesus. Or would you be able to say, you know what, I had a great week. Let me tell you about the people that I spoke to about Jesus. How was your week? Let me ask you a different question. What will you be doing this week? Or maybe being more specific, who is it that you will chatter the good news of Jesus to this week? As we chatter the gospel, our faith grows and we are sure of salvation.